One clear misconception is that it's very hard to make money in media and events. Yes, it is challenging to scale, but if done right, actually they can be extremely profitable. I've actually told some founders before, the businesses that you have, build an event layer because the impact that gives you, the visibility that gives you, plus the revenue and profits that gives you can be quite significant to the company.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave. Evo Commerce sells premium affordable supplements and personal care electronics, operating in Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. Strive brand sells salon-grade quality products for home use and using direct-to-consumer channels through its online retail channels and physical shops. BBAC is the leader in hangover remedies in over 2,000 retail outlets across the region. Learn more at bbac.co and stryv.co. Hey Mohan, how are you?
Hey, morning. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, finally. I mean, we've been friends for quite a while now. Here I see you popping up on somebody else's podcast first.
I just did one yesterday. It took a while to set this up, so I'm glad we finally made it happen.
Okay. I'll take it. Okay, finally you're here. I'm excited to kind of like share your journey with more folks. Mohan, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so full name is Mohan Belani. I was a part of the team that started E27 back in the early days of the tech ecosystem. So I've been running that for a while. I had a gaming company called Go Games that took off, was trying to raise capital, but decided to shut it down and talk a bit more about that later. I spent some time doing BD and Make33, Little Lives, edutech company. So if any of you in Singapore have kids in kindergartens, you would have definitely used the app. And then kick off my angel investing journey in 2013. And then back about 2 years ago, started Orvel Venture together with Milan and yourself. So I've been very fortunate to play a fun role in the early stages of the tech ecosystem and contribute to it in some way.
You went to National University of Singapore back as an undergraduate. You were doing a bachelor's in computer engineering. You were part of the NUS Overseas Colleges, like the NOC batch network. Could you share a little bit more about what you were like as an undergraduate?
So I started this from the education journey standpoint, right, wanting to be heavy into tech, potentially wanting to join a big company or a government or the typical Singaporean pathway, right? I didn't know anything about startups. I read a lot about tech companies growing up, but NOC was the opportunity to do something different, plus also take some time off from Singapore. Right? I figured overseas exposure would be helpful, and I didn't want to just do a 6 months internship kind of thing. So 1 year there made sense. And then while I was there, of course, the big learning was like, if you really want to change the world and if you really want to solve a big problem, the best way to do it is with a fast and nimble team with resources that allow them to scale the problem regionally or even globally. So that's how the journey started. And the company that I joined, I was actually employee number 1. So it was just me and the CEO. So on one level, it was great because I got to do everything from joining board meetings, going to events, helping him do marketing, sitting down with his VP and all that. So the exposure was quite amazing. On the other side, it was also quite lonely because it was literally just me and him until maybe halfway in where the third person joined. So I didn't get that full maybe exposure where it's a 10-man company where you can learn from different functions and teams. So the learnings were limited on some level, but also very impactful because I got to go quite deep.
Yeah, amazing. And so there you are, and you decide to take the experience and join the tech ecosystem in your early part of career. Could you share a bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I was there, I think the one key learning that I had was how to do sales, how to do BD, and how to get out more. I was always a tech guy, and I didn't fully understand the value of networking, meeting people, or building relationships. So NUSIA, which is the NUS Entrepreneurship Association that I was at, I was the president for a while, decided to just put myself out there and be in an uncomfortable position, right? So when I came back to Singapore, this was in 2007. So E27 had already been formed as a community locally in NUS. So a lot of the alumni of NOC had started like a community that allowed them to carry on the activities that they're doing in the US, event, hanging out, networking, those. So I was like the last entry joiner. And back in that era, the student community was the one that were being pushed to look into startups, not the corporate or the older communities. So when there was the iGEM program, I don't know if you remember that NDA started, NUS became one of the appointee incubators. And then they started this incubator at the back of NUS in PGP called Karat. And naturally, NUS basically said, hey, E27, can you guys do it? And that was the early formation of the company with about, I think, 20 of us, and then helping to do ecosystem building activities in the school. And I was, again, the last guy that joined. So I did the launch party in here, Ishak House. And then I started getting more involved in the general E27 activities while I was still as a student on campus. I remember I had a professor who sat down with me and said, look, don't bother getting A's and all that. Just do your bare minimum, because if you have a side hustle or a side business, you're better off focusing on that. So that's what I did. I was juggling E27 ecosystem building work and schoolwork, just making sure I don't screw the schoolwork up.
Sorry, I'm just wondering what your grades were.
It was terrible. Bare minimum. Let's just say I got multiple warning letters. I was on scholarship, right? So I got multiple warning letters and I had to do multiple appeals, but it was like the bare minimum just to scrape by.
Yeah, I totally get it. And you graduated and then you started working at kind of like multiple companies as well, right? What were your thoughts back then?
Yeah. So Little Life was the company that I worked there for about a year and a half. I mean, I liked EduTech. And then the founder's son, I think she's really a very inspiring person in wanting to really change the EduTech landscape and make an impact on early stage education. But more from the aspect of, she started when I was there, more from the aspect on the tooling, so everything from attendance taking to temperature monitoring, and then of course e-portfolios and those kind of things to track the development of children. So that was quite an amazing experience, because I was selling to an audience that required a lot of education and training. They were really not familiar with basic things like using the iPad or even logging into systems, right? So BD was way more than just purely selling. I think that was my big learning on, you got to sell, but then you also got to be the guy that really helps to make sure that onboarding happens well, support happens well, and adoption happens well. So I was regularly contacted by kindergarten teachers and principals, right, from really little micro product related issue. I was going to kindergartens all across the country, just training teachers and really helping to convince them that we as a company were supportive of their journey and understanding of the problems, but also making them realize that, hey, look, you have to learn to adopt and all these new systems and services in order to do your work more. And that ended up working quite well. I think there were a couple of hundred PCF kindergartens, right? They were very actively using the solutions. And then now, of course, Little Lives is a fairly larger company that has done work around the region. So that was my first kind of real job, if you put it into a context that way. And then the other one is MiG-33. So MiG-33, for those of you who don't know, is a mobile social network back in the feature phone era. And they had very smart features way before any other networks were doing, around stickers and using a peer-to-peer monetization model, using credit and all that. And they used to target primarily markets like Bangladesh, Nepal, again, where feature phones were big. They were publicly listed in Australia. So my role over there was to basically get the partnership going with Electronic Arts to launch a game on the platform. So that was a short contract role for about 3 months. And I was doing all of this while having the gaming company and Orvel Games that I started. We didn't raise much funding at that point, or any funding at that point. We got some small government grants. So this was a way just to keep the lights on, have a bit of capital on the side. Because don't forget, I started this a year after school, around 2010. So I didn't have the base savings to help. And then when I was raising money for Gokil Games, so Gokil, my main role was product. So that's when I started to build a tech team in the Philippines. I was going up and down quite often. I was fully handling everything for product. So got the product launched, started monetizing it. And then as I was raising capital from it and talking to VC, I realized my passion and interest for it was waning, and I just didn't have the gusto. And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, what if the next 2-3 years of my life looked like just launching more games and going to more markets, it just didn't excite me anymore. It didn't feel like meaningful work. Yeah. And that's how then that the VC I was talking to for Gokil Games ended up becoming the first angel investor for E27.
So what's interesting is that you're obviously going through a massive amount of discovery, right? From my perspective, because after university, you basically did 3 very different roles. One with MiG-33, which is a social network. One was being a founder of a startup. Another one, like you said, was being kind of like consultant, kind of like second in command to a CEO and a founder. And then you kind of all converged into making a decision. Could you share more about that decision, which was like working on E27?
So this was like late 2011, right? At that point in time, I mean, E27 had a small team of its own. I think there were like 4 people there. Cap table was a mess because it started with 20 people. Although there was a bit of cleanup along the way, it still was non-functioning cap table. And then there was really no direction at that point in time. So I decided with my co-founder now, Thaddeus, to come up with a plan for 6 months. To me, it was a transition work. Let's see whether this could make sense for 6 months. but let's also bring in the new angel investors and get him to sit with us 2, 3 times a week, coach us, mentor us, and let's clean up the cap table and look at the amount of cash in bank and then see what we can do with that. So we had about 6 months of runway to figure that out. And Jan 2012 is when we kind of officially started doing that. I think in the early days, it was basically just brand reset, cap table reset, figure out where our role lies in the ecosystem, and then take it step by step. No point planning 3 years down the road. Look at it, what's going to happen within the next 6 months. And we were quite lucky that the work that we did was of a level that attracted other investors. So that's how we had Japanese investors coming to us saying, hey, could we invest? And the intention really wasn't to raise more capital. It was to look at working with partners that could help us expand to new markets. So we had investors from Japan, Thailand, Taiwan, Indonesia come in late 2012, early 2013, based off the work that we did in the first year. And the high level idea was that can we work with these partners, take some capital from them, but use most of the capital to actually launch new markets in the region or do investments into E27 equivalents in these other markets. I mean, that strategy, of course, didn't work because the challenge was that there were only a few players regionally that were very active, and most of the equivalents in the regional markets were either side hustles that people were doing, or they had a concentration risk from a revenue standpoint, or it just didn't seem like a very sustainable, viable business. So we had to just unfortunately just do everything ourselves.
So what's interesting is that you've now been handling E27 for effectively 13 years, which is a good chunk of time. And obviously you've seen the tech ecosystem grow from zero to hero, I guess. What is your reflections on building E27?
I mean, so there are multiple areas, right? I think if we take a step back, the first part is in realizing that there are very clear revenue models when it comes to building companies like ours that are quite straightforward, right? That we could have doubled down on a lot larger early on rather than try to be different, right? Clearly making money from lead gen, from content marketing, from events, right? I think in the early days, everyone wanted to be different. They wanted to try, let's try to be different. Let's try to have new ideas or new models. But the truth of the matter is for companies like us, there are very specific revenue models and there are ways to build them and also be quite strong with them early on. So those are some of the areas that I wish we had doubled down on early on. The second thing is that, like it or not, and this was a realization that I didn't make earlier on, but now of course it's very apparent, right? Organizations like us are fairly similar to typically what governments do and associations that exist in the region, right? At some point, there will be a convergence between the work for-profit companies like us do and what the government is trying to achieve, right? The goal here is this, right? You can be more collaborative, more partnership driven, and try to find win-wins for each other while making sure that some level of turf control is maintained, right? So on hindsight, I think there were areas that, or the learning here is that there were parts that maybe we could have done better to build more synergistic relationships and partnerships with more of the government agencies around the region. Because they have a very different mode of operating, right? They don't have a top line, bottom line related issue to resolve. For them, it's all about using capital invested in the ecosystem without the need for that capital to be returned back from a profit standpoint, but from an ROI standpoint, right? How many investments, how many jobs and all that. So the way they calculate metrics is a completely different model. The last part is really with respect to growth and scaling, right? There are clear areas to move into. For example, investments or funds, right? That looking back would have been like now I think it's very clear that maybe E27 should have started a fund. Maybe we should have started an angel syndicates that we could have done much earlier on rather than wait to a level where the ecosystem is much more stabilized and mature, right? So a lot of these that I wanted to do was going to happen around 2019, 2020. But unfortunately, with COVID, it wiped out that entire plan. And I had to go back to zero and survival mode and all that, which wasn't helpful to the base that we have built. So I think looking back, there were these three things that could have been planned out and could have been better done from the 2012 to 2020 period that maybe would have put us in a different position today.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the pandemic was a tough time. How was that a tough time? Because from an outsider's perspective, media, everybody's at home, everybody's reading the news and stuff like that. So it doesn't seem like a bad time for media. What happened?
Yeah, so fundamentally it's because of our revenue model, right? A large chunk of our revenue model was through events, and events being physical operations. That was the first thing to go from a pandemic standpoint. And typically when you plan events, you do them 6 months in advance. So for our events in June, we had already started planning them in December and Jan. Sometimes you might incur costs, sometimes you might have collected some level of revenue. So managing that part was problem number one. And if you don't have if a large chunk of our revenue was events and we couldn't do events, the need to pivot and evolve was very necessary. I think on hindsight, what we did well is recognize that, and I was also lucky because I had a bit of some intel from other sources, but recognize that there's no point in postponing the events, which is what a lot of the players did. So every major event organizer said, "Oh, we'll postpone." We were the only ones that said, "No, we'll cancel." And I did get some flack from different agencies and folks in the industry. I think the message I wanted to send to my own team as well was that we are burning the ships and we have no other way forward. So there's no backup plan here, right? We have to figure out how is it going to work, or what the new plan is going to be. Otherwise, we'll work on. I mean, psychologically, I was very, very pumped by the opportunity to try and do new things. But the truth of the matter, I was also very, very scared that a lot of it will not work. And then what happens then? So yes, everyone is home. If you have a pure media-centric business where it's all purely subscriptions, purely content marketing, then yes, it will make sense. So that's what we did, right? On one level, we pivoted a lot of our offline revenue channels to online. So our media revenue did extremely well. Our online business matching webinar revenue did extremely well. But offline revenue, everything died. And then, of course, from a skills standpoint, the skill sets that it might seem, oh, the same skill sets that you do offline stuff, you can do it online. But there are micro tweaks, right, to the way you operate that actually completely changed it. So it was a difficult transition. I think it took us maybe about a full 2020 to really realize that transition. But 2021, 2022, 2023 ended up becoming the 3 best years in the company history. Yeah, painful, but very, very, very happy transition. And then now we're building off that back, bringing some of the older elements back.
What are some myths or misconceptions about building, like you said, media, but also events business?
Yeah, the one clear misconception is that it's very hard to make money in media and events. Yes, it is challenging to scale, but if done right, actually they can be extremely profitable. There are multiple events that happen in Singapore that are run by 3-4-man team. They do anywhere within 3 to 5 million in revenue, and about 30% of that is in pure EBITDA. And I've actually told some founders before, like the businesses that you have, build an event layer, because the impact that gives you, the visibility that gives you, plus the revenue and profits that gives you can be quite significant to the company. I mean, if you look at just advertising media events, it still is a fairly large chunk of the revenue part. Even if you look at Carousel, a large chunk of the revenue base still comes from ads, from their media business. So I think that part really shouldn't be ignored. And of course, it needs to be done well. It needs to be done right. The experience that you have with the online user base has to translate well to offline. Like I even spoke about this with Kenneth from CE, previously CE, right, when he was still there. And they were building out their events base as well, right? The level of stickiness that you get, it can be extremely powerful. Now, the pitfall to this is that it is easy to make mistakes when doing these kind of event activities, where you do the activities or the features for the vanity reason. Because events are still physical, right? There's a certain element of vanity metric. So that caution has to be managed. How do you make sure that the work you do in events delivers real ROI, but it also can be monetizable and don't fall into the pitfall of vanity metric? And that's really what happened with tech events from 2016 onwards. You had every other event falling into the pitfall of vanity metrics, wanting to be the largest tech conference in Southeast Asia, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 people, really going for the wrong numbers. And then you had the government coming in trying to do events, throwing money at the problem, just giving free ticket, free everything. And then that kind of messed it up for the whole industry. So that's the good and bad of the event space.
I've met folks who want to do events, and the big concern, of course, is that every VC fund also wants to fund the events as well. So it's a form of lead generation for VC funds. So there's a lot of debate, which is, hey, events are therefore not valuable as highly competitive.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on your customer base. If you have a platform that has so we use CD as an example, right? CD is a large engaged online community. It's a content topic that's very popular, and it just makes logical sense for them to hold financial education and literacy centric conversations. And then it gives them the opportunity to also engage key government stakeholders, parties in the ecosystem. But if CD did it in such a way where the event is just all about size and vanity, and they didn't focus on the bottom line, or they didn't build the right features and products to make the event monetizable, then there'll be a waste. But I think CD is a good example of a company that's done events fairly well. And while they started primarily as an online platform, I think Carousel has done events. I'm not sure if they are meant to make money, but they at least have a physical touch point to the brand, but also a physical element to secondhand goods and all of that. So it has to be done really well, right? If you look at brands like Asian Parent, the Mummies event space is massive. You could build a very profitable events unit just based on that. Now, the key question is, should you do it to disrupt the space or compete with the existing players? Or should you just sponsor them and partner with them? Now, that's a different discussion. I think that requires a lot more depth in terms of figuring out what's the ROI you could get from sponsoring and being part of existing events versus driving them on your own. But from a brand building, from a lead gen standpoint, it's extremely powerful.
And what's interesting is that you've also done a lot of angel investing personally over the same time frame. So you invested in over 30 startups. and early technology funds. So both as an angel, but also as an LP in Southeast Asia funds. What's your reflections on this?
Yeah, so the journey for that started in 2013 when I raised capital for E27. I was getting secondary exits, right? And my one thought process was like, if I want to be active and legitimate in the space, I do have to invest in it myself. And what I started doing first is to invest in funds. And the logic was that I rather put capital in a group of people that I felt knew what they were doing better than me, who had access to the deal flow and had some level of diversity, but I could also learn from them. And that's what I did. I was an LP in Golden Gate Fund 1 back in 2013. So always thankful to Vinny and Jeff for allowing a small fund like me. But that kickstarted the journey, because then just telling other founders that, oh, I'm an LP there, added some level of credibility, opened up some doors. But it also, through the reports and through talking to Jeff and Vinny, allowed me to figure out what angel investing meant for me. So I started with a smaller portfolio 2013 period. And the logic was to invest in companies that were building technology to disrupt traditional industries. That was the logic back then. So I invested in a logistics company. I invested in like a drone tech company. So a lot of quite heavy logistics centric stuff. And invested in a health tech company. So there were about 5 deals before getting advice from my mentor of, hey, look, you're doing all this angel investment. Do you really know what you're doing with this one? Second thing is that how are you comparing? What are your comparables? Have you read financial reports from Microsoft and all these companies? So that was an eye-opener for me. So I decided that from 2015 onwards, I would do exclusively public investings only. So in a way, I kind of missed out the growth of the angel ecosystem from 2015, but I was again learning through public investing. I built up a portfolio of 40 companies. I was using the advantage, the knowledge that we have in tech, investing in like Twilio and Atlassian, when the general mainstream investors did not know any of these companies.
Right.
And then in 2018, when I felt like I had enough knowledge, I decided to liquidate half that portfolio, set up a private fund to go back to investing in startups. Wasn't so straightforward again, because the ecosystem was different. Minimum check sizes were a lot higher. It was way more complex. So I had to take a more portfolio-centric approach. So I decided, okay, I'll do some early, some growth, some VC, some Southeast Asia, some US. And then that's how I ended up building the whole portfolio. So if you look at it, Kearney Jackson was all US early stage. Right. The GT1 was early stage, but New Zealand and US. And then a few other funds were more local specific. So you had Indonesian funds, you had Philippines funds, and then the rest were startups. Some early, some growth, some pre-IPO, those kind.
Yeah, you've done Golden Gate Ventures, you've also done Foxmont in the Philippines, and you've done Alpha GWC for Indonesia. And then both of us have invested in Rebel Fund, which handles a lot
US.
for US and Y company startups. So what are some reflections from seeing it from the LP perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, the one big reflection is that I think Southeast Asia VC, firstly, is still very early. That's very obvious. But for an ecosystem to work in any particular market, you need to have local funds run by local GPs that are operated locally, or they could be local by nature or spend some time overseas. Right? But more importantly, they need to have raised capital from local LPs, right? And they need to, in most cases, be exclusively investing in local companies. So to me, that base layer of funds in all of the Southeast Asian markets is a reflection of whether there's going to be a healthy ecosystem. And I'm always on the lookout for these kind of funds where I feel that the GPs have everything at stake to make sure that they invest locally and get the local ecosystem built up. And because the boots on the ground, because they have money locally, right, they have a very strong vested interest to make it work. They're not, for example, Philippines or Thailand or Vietnam is not a 20% mandate out of a regional fund. So that part I think is very critical for me. That's one. Second thing is also when it comes to the VCs, right, just understanding their trajectory in terms of what does Fund 2, Fund 3 look like for them can give you a bit of an insight on how they think from a growth standpoint. So I think for VCs that have ambitions to raise much larger funds much earlier on, tend to stay away from them most of the time. I prefer VCs that are much more interested in having smaller funds and exclusively operating in one market and interested to go in early and work with founders on the ground earlier. So if you look at Spiral Ventures, for example, in Japan, they have done, I think, 4 or 5 funds now, all of them below 30 mil, all of them investing early, but each fund having a different geography or sector focus. So I think funds like that, like a Rebel fund, again, similar, right? They only look at YC. They have a very specific thesis, and every fund more or less focuses on that similar thesis. So those are two of the learnings that I have on the VC side. And then on the founder side, I'm still very driven by investing in founders that are trying to make the world better in their own way of form, right? I think when I invest directly into companies, it is less purely on enterprise. It's really more on like founder vision, founder dream, and seeing how I can make a small impact in helping them.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that you've also transitioned and started to formalize some of this with Orvel Ventures as well. where we collaborate now, I look at companies. What's been that reflection? Because as a change from an angel investor individual, I made
Yeah.
this transition towards a more structured approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge difference using your own money and investing versus someone else's money. That need for a systemized and structured approach, such that every company is looked at with a similar lens, has been, I think, quite helpful. So the way we look at gross margin, the way we look at GTMs, the way we look at exit opportunities for companies, having a systemized approach that allows you to scale that thinking process, I think that has been an important part. But so Orvel started, again, I never intended to start a fund. Orvel started through a random drinking session with Milan. And it started really from the crux of, hey, if we were starting a new company today, who would we want to raise capital from? And of course, Milan had his own list, I had my own list, and we were comparing the list. And then we were realizing that every VC investor had their pros and cons naturally. But how useful were they? How relevant were they? And that's when we started to get to this concept of like, you know what, actually the funds today that exist today might not be well equipped or in the right place to be supporting the founders today. And I think founders probably need a different type of venture fund to support them in the early stages for this current market environment. And that's when we said, okay, what if we started a fund? How would it look like? How would it look like on the founder side in terms of support? How would that look like on the investment side in terms of capital allocation? But then, since we're all investors ourselves, how would it look like to LPs? We've all heard this whole issue on Southeast Asia having DPI problems. I have a slightly different take and thesis to that. I don't think Southeast Asia is a DPI problem. I think it's an exit culture problem, and that seems to be getting better over time. But then the idea was that if Orvel as a new fund can help founders and LPs at the same time and also remain relevant to the current market condition compared to all the other funds, then maybe we should start the fund, right? So it really started with us putting on the founder hat first and saying, hey, if I raise capital today, who will be the VCs I would want? And we couldn't, between the two of us, we couldn't come up with a good enough list of VC partners that we would want on our side supporting us and working with us.
On that note, could you share about a time that you personally have been brave?
There have been multiple ups and downs with E27 story, right? We had to do a bunch of layoffs in 2016. And then, of course, there was the COVID challenge in 2020. I think the one time where I really had to stick to my guns and be brave by whatever definition that really means was really back in the March-April period. That's the concept of the peacetime and wartime CEO. I've had to really step into the wartime CEO mode in 2016 when we did the layoffs. And that wasn't fun. I think if you talk to any employee then, they probably have a lot of bad things to say about the way I was operating. It was painful but necessary. But in 2020, the wartime CEO concept was slightly different, where there had to be a pragmatic view on the market and the opportunity, and I couldn't fake it entirely. There had to be a certain amount of realism in play, but I couldn't also push so hard because everyone was going through very painful overhaul of their own life. So I think that part, for me, braveness comes at that part where I had to be extra humble, I had to be extra empathetic, but also extra ballsy at the same time. And managing these conflicting emotions. I couldn't ask 100% from my team because everyone was struggling in their own way from the whole work from home situation. But at the same time, I also had to make sure that we were giving 110% because if we did not, we wouldn't have ever survived it. So that, I think that period professionally was probably the toughest, but also the most rewarding period. I think braveness also comes from creativity at that point of time. I clearly had to come up with very creative ideas to continue to let the company function. So one simple thing I did while everybody was doing layoffs or pay cuts, I did deferred payments instead for salaries, right? And I remember having conversations with half the company for that. So we came up with a model, and everyone I called, that person would end up typically crying within the first few minutes or be in a total state of shock because everyone assumed that by default we were laying them off. And to me, it's, oh no, I'm actually going to just defer half your salary for the next 6 months and I'll pay you back everything 6 months later. So that braveness also came with having to be creative, having to come up with different ideas to survive that period. Tough, but very rewarding experience overall.
Yeah. And when we think about all of that, what advice would you give to your younger undergraduate self studying computer engineering?
Oh man, I might seem more processed and structured these days, and I definitely wasn't like that before. So I use OKRs for my own personal life. I do weekly reflections. And so this happened because in 2016, I was in a hotel watching the balloon drop New Year's Eve experience, one of those cliched ones, right? And as the balloons were dropping, right, I was sitting up and reflecting. I was like, the hell did I do, right, for the last year, right? I couldn't conclusively say, what did I achieve? What did I do? And it's not that I didn't do anything or didn't achieve anything. 2015 was not a bad year. It's just that I wasn't writing it down and I wasn't reflecting on it on a regular basis. I didn't have a way to go back and see it if I wanted to. And 2016 started my journey of, okay, let me plan my life in quarterly periods. Let me use weekly ways to reflect, to make sure that I'm always tweaking and making sure that I know where I'm going. And then let me take every quarter with a fresh approach, right? And ask myself, okay, did I enjoy last quarter, everything that I planned out? In this new quarter, what do I want to achieve? Do I want to double down on what I did, or do I want to do something completely new? And I think if I were to look back, that's really what I would have told my old self. If you come up with systems and processes that allow you to be efficient, allow you to manage time, but also allow you to reflect back, that will hopefully help live a more fulfilling life rather than just purely live as it comes and be overly happy-go-lucky, because then before you know it, a significant amount of time can come and you might feel like at a loss because nothing was achieved or nothing was done. When in truth, a lot was achieved and a lot was done. There was just no reflection on it.
Yeah. On that note, I'd love to kind of like summarize the 3 big takeaways to go from this conversation. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about your early decisions as a student, but also in your early career, trying to figure out what role and what industry you want to build in. And I think it's fascinating to hear that decision-making process. Secondly, thanks for sharing about some of the myths and misconceptions about building a media and events business like E27, but also some of the tough times like the pandemic and also making a decision to cancel events versus then defer them and the hard decisions you have to make around salaries and compensation. So I think fascinating to hear that angle as well. Lastly, thanks so much for sharing about your investing journey, how you've seen the ecosystem develop overall, and talk a little bit about the exit culture and fund performance and what you're looking for in fund managers in the region, and also thinking through about what are some of the reflections that people have to think about across the ecosystem, across the 30 over investments over the past 12 years. On that note, thank you so much, Mohan, for sharing.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy. So glad we finally got a chance to do this.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.